Old cowboy Jake Blackwood lost everything. His ranch, his life's work, was treacherously seized as a result of a vile yet legal scheme. Behind it stood County Sheriff Aaron Stone, whose greed and thirst for power knew no bounds, systematically ruining honest folk for his own gain. But fate, or perhaps the very spirit of Montana, prepared an unexpected chance for Jake, and a harsh reckoning for the sheriff, hidden within his own secret records. Get ready to discover how one small book changed the course of events and why justice in the end triumphed over the most cynical deceit. Montana, 1888. Jacob Jake Blackwood, a man whose name was synonymous with reliability in these harsh lands, stood like an old, unyielding oak directly across from the massive oak desk of County Sheriff Aaron Stone. Jake's hands, gnarled and sinewy, like the weathered roots of ancient trees that clung stubbornly to the stony soil of his ranch, betrayed decades of grueling labor under the scorching sun and icy winds. The air in the sheriff's stuffy, cramped office was thick and heavy, permeated with the pungent smell of dust, sweat, and a distinct, almost palpable atmosphere of concealed, latent injustice. The light filtering through the grimy window appeared dim and lifeless, only emphasizing the grimness of the surrounding world. Jake, whose word had always been tougher than the strongest steel, and whose deep attachment to his land was boundless and unshakable, held an official notice in his hand, like a verdict delivered by fate itself. His fingers involuntarily tightened, crumpling the edge of the yellowed parchment, and the words inscribed in the clerk's neat handwriting burned his gaze like a red-hot branding iron. Every letter, every word etched itself into his memory, penetrating deep into his consciousness. Due to the default on a loan payment from July 12, 1887, Blackwood Ranch, including all adjacent lands, water sources, and structures, is hereby county property and will be immediately put up for public auction. Sheriff Aaron Stone. Anger. This was not merely an emotion. It was a powerful, all-consuming wave that surged from the deepest recesses of Jake's soul, scorching his lungs, constricting his throat, and clouding his vision with a red haze. He remembered every minute, every frustrating detail of that ill-fated, fateful day when he took that very loan from Stone. Back then, less than a year ago, the sheriff had seemed so accommodating, so understanding, almost friendly. "Just a formality, Jacob," Stone had cajoled, his smile then appearing so sincere, so welcoming to Jake. "You know, old man, I always stand by my people, especially those who work from dawn till dusk. It's just an insurance, in case of a drought or some other calamity." But now, looking at this paper decree, Jake realized with a chilling, piercing clarity the full depth and treachery of what had transpired. It had all been a devilishly cunning, skillfully planned trap. Aaron Stone, a man whose eyes had long and maliciously coveted the rich, fertile, well-watered lands of the Blackwoods, had methodically and expertly manipulated all the documents. He had hidden from Jake the tiniest, almost invisible fine print in the agreement, adding fraudulent, exorbitant, truly predatory interest rates that made repaying the loan virtually impossible. This was not merely a regrettable error in calculation, not a silly misjudgment on Jake's part. It was a deliberate, cold-blooded, cynical, and utterly merciless stripping away of everything he owned, a meticulously planned crime. In that moment, Jake felt not just deceived, but utterly ruined, his dignity trampled in the most despicable way. Stone's motivation was absolutely transparent, like the purest, clearest mountain water on a bright, sunny day, boundless power and insatiable, greedy ambition. He brazenly and shamelessly used his public office, his authority, to enrich himself at the expense of honest, trusting farmers, ruthlessly seizing their lands under the guise of absolutely legal, juridically flawless transactions. His method was simple and effective: find someone in distress, offer help, and then once the victim was caught in the net, tighten it to the extreme, leaving no chance of escape. Jake, who had believed in people's decency his entire life, valued an honest word above all else, and always kept his promises, felt not just duped, but deeply to his core, humiliated. His ranch? It wasn't just a patch of dirt, not just a collection of buildings. It was the fruit of 3 generations of back-breaking, impossible labor by the Blackwoods, literally soaked in the sweat of his father and grandfather. It held the priceless, inexpressible memory of his late wife Emma, whose gentle, melodic laughter still seemed to echo in the rustle of the boundless fields and the whisper of the wind through the old oaks. Every crack in the walls of his home, every stone in the foundation, was imbued with memories now defiled by the sheriff's dirty hands. Jake lifted his gaze and looked directly at Stone, who was sprawled languidly in his large, creaking chair, a self-satisfied, undisguised, triumphant smirk fixed on his face. The sheriff made no effort to hide his anticipation. His eyes, cold and calculating, gleamed avariciously with the prospect of quick profit and a new victory. In that agonizing, piercing moment, Jake finally and irrevocably understood that this conflict would not be resolved in the quiet of offices, nor by the soulless letter of the law. This was no longer just another legal dispute, not an ordinary land argument. It had become his personal, ruthless, hard-won battle for family honor, for his roots, for everything that was truly dear to him in this life. Jake's heart, which usually remained calm and steady, now pounded with such force, like a massive blacksmith's hammer, beating a furious, frantic rhythm of an approaching inevitable storm. He knew with every fiber of his being, every cell of his weary but strong body, that this official verdict, delivered on ordinary paper, would only be the very first insignificant step on his new, incredibly difficult, and mortally perilous path. A path he had to see through to the end, no matter the cost. He felt something cold, steel-like, unyielding beginning to form within him, the foundation for future retribution. When Jake, swaying with exhaustion and moral shock, finally returned to his ranch, he was met by a deafening, unbearable silence. This silence was heavier than any noise. It pressed down on his chest, making the air seem thick and viscous. The gates, which he had mended every year with a father's care and love, now hung on a single, miraculously clinging hinge, like the broken wing of a giant bird mourning its fall. The livestock, which had been his pride, the foundation of his existence, and the source of life on the ranch, had been scattered, only empty corrals silently gazing at him, like witnesses to the recent devastation. The house itself, which Emma, his deceased, prematurely departed wife, had so selflessly loved to adorn with fresh flowers, filling it with fragrance and warmth, now stood with shattered windows, and these gaping openings seemed to Jake like empty, tear-filled eye sockets staring into the boundless distance with an expression of deep, inconsolable grief. He slowly, almost dragging his feet, walked through each room, where every object, every corner held priceless, now agonizingly sharp memories. Here was the old hearth where their family fire once cheerfully crackled, warming cold Montana evenings. A little further on, the small wooden cradle where his children had peacefully slept, taken too soon and unjustly by illness, leaving an eternal gaping void in Jake's heart. On the mantelpiece, where a small vase of wildflowers always sat, lay a yellowed photograph of Emma, in which she smiled so vividly, so genuinely, as if she were still right there in this deserted, cold home. Every such touch to the past, every rekindled memory caused an unbearable, burning, piercing pain that engulfed him completely, reaching into the deepest corners of his soul. This was not merely the deprivation of material possessions or the loss of ancestral land, which he had tilled his entire conscious life. It was a barbaric, merciless, and utterly senseless destruction of his entire life, his past, his present, and any hopes for the future. The world he had painstakingly built over many years had crumbled in an instant. He repeatedly replayed in his mind the image of Stone's face, his empty, cold eyes, which remained utterly indifferent when he pronounced the icy words of confiscation. The sheriff didn't even bat an eyelid, didn't twitch a single muscle on his face, when Jake, desperate and having lost all hope for mercy, tried to appeal to their shared history, to the memory of his own father, who had once, long ago, in difficult times, helped Stone Sr., giving him shelter and a crust of bread. This finally convinced Jake that Stone was not merely a ruthless bureaucrat who was just doing his job, following the letter of the law. He was a man who had long and irrevocably lost all moral bearings. His soul, it seemed, had been completely and entirely sold to insatiable greed and an unlimited desire for absolute dominance over others. Stone's motivation was not just quick personal enrichment, but also a blatant, cruel demonstration of his boundless power, a desire to fully mock those whom he believed dared to consider themselves above or even equal to him in status and dignity. He wanted to break their spirits, to make them feel worthless. Jake sank onto the threshold of his desolated home, leaning his back against the cold wood that had once supported Emma's climbing roses. The sun slowly descended, painting the vast Montana sky in crimson and golden hues, colors that on other days in his former life had brought him peace and serenity. But today, these colors only intensified his deep, piercing sense of loss and despair, making his pain even more unbearable. He felt incredibly old, utterly exhausted, every bone in his body seemingly aching from weariness, yet surprisingly he did not feel broken. In this all-consuming pain and this profound despair that seemed destined to finally crush him, unexpectedly like a spark in utter darkness, a new, cold yet incredibly firm and unyielding hope was born. He didn't yet know exactly how he would do it, couldn't see a clear path, but he swore on the ruins of his destroyed home, gazing at the darkening horizon, that Aaron Stone would surely pay for every tear stolen from him and for every stolen breath, for every future he had ruined. This conflict, which began with an intricate legal ploy and merciless deception, had now escalated into a deeply personal vendetta, a struggle not only for his own future, but also for trampled justice. Jake, an old cowboy who thoroughly knew this land and its harsh, unwritten laws, felt a dormant strength awaken within him, fueled by the pain of loss, despair, and an unyielding steel-like resolve. He knew he had to not only reclaim his land and property, but also restore trampled justice throughout the entire county, no matter the cost. His heart, tormented by grief, now burned with a furious fire. Week after week, Jake Blackwood wandered through the surrounding towns and dusty trails, like a solitary ghost from the past whose presence was barely felt, but whose purpose was unshakable, etched in the stone of his heart. He lived on the very edge, scraping by with sporadic, hard, odd jobs on farms or with road crews, subsisting on what little he could find, be it hardtack or jerky. But his mind, remarkably, remained crystal clear and sharp, like a honed flint that pierces a swift mountain stream. He meticulously, bit by bit, gathered information, like a prospector sifting river sand in search of precious gold nuggets. In every dusty saloon where weary travelers, cattle drivers, and locals, tired from their day's labor, gathered, in every small shop reeking of kerosene, dried herbs, and sawdust, he carefully listened to conversations, catching every word, every hint, every sigh. Aaron Stone's name, like a sinister whisper on the wind, surfaced again and again, always in the context of dark, dirty dealings, vile threats, forced evictions, and the most unsavory illegal financial schemes. Gradually, from fragments of phrases, unspoken stories, and frightened whispers, Jake began to piece together a complete and terrifying picture. He learned of a hapless farmer named Thomas O'Connor, who lost his prosperous dairy farm through the same intricate scheme as Jake, finding himself in a debt trap set by the sheriff. He heard heartbreaking tales of a widow, Mrs. Evelyn Stokes, whom Stone had coldly, without the slightest hint of remorse, bankrupted just to seize her only once profitable gold mine that had provided her with a steady income. And there were many such stories. Each new detail, each new victim only strengthened Jake's cold, steel-like resolve. He realized the horrifying truth. Stone was not just a solitary, isolated con artist, but a predatory, systemic spider, weaving an extensive, deadly web across the entire county, ensnaring more and more victims. His true motivation ran far deeper than simply acquiring Jake's single ranch. He sought to build an entire personal empire, founded on fear, despair, complete ruin, and the utter hopelessness of innocent people. Jake felt his personal pain, the bitterness of loss, now transforming into a firm, unshakable, rock-solid hope. Hope that he, an old cowboy, could not only seek revenge for himself, but also stop this merciless man, this living machine for destroying human lives. This was no longer just about personal revenge. It had transformed into a genuine crusade, a mission to restore justice for all those whom Stone had wronged, trampled, stripped of their last shred of hope. He cautiously, step by step, began to seek out people who had suffered at the sheriff's hands, trying to establish contact with them to earn their trust. At first, they were scared, their eyes expressing deep distrust. They avoided him like a leper, fearing an extra word or glance that might attract the sheriff's attention. But Jake was persistent, patient, and sincere in his intentions. He shared his own story, his pain, his grief, his anger, and gradually, very slowly, their distrust gave way to timid but genuine interest. He saw in their eyes a reflection of his own hope, his desire to reclaim what had been stolen. He knew that only by joining forces could they stand against this evil. One night, as a thin, blade-like crescent moon still hung above the horizon, in a dimly lit, barely noticeable, secluded tavern on the outskirts of a desolate town, Jake finally met an elderly man named Sam White, once a respected and conscientious clerk at the county courthouse. Sam, whom Stone had unceremoniously fired under a flimsy pretext, now lived in constant fear, but a deep, suppressed hatred for Stone still burned in his eyes, like two embers in the darkness. With a voice trembling from nervous tension, constantly glancing around as if expecting the sheriff's shadow behind him, Sam quietly whispered about Stone's black book. "He keeps all his dirty dealings in there, Jacob," Sam said, his eyes darting about with feverish speed. "In the safe, in his office, behind that big painting of Indians, all the fake documents, all the forged signatures, all the names of his victims, all the stolen amounts, absolutely everything. It's his curse, Jacob, and his doom." This was exactly the information, that priceless key, that Jake had been searching for weeks but couldn't find. At that very moment, intrigue reached its absolute peak, and Jake's plan finally took clear shape. Jake felt an unaccustomed strength surging within him, in his old but strong veins, and this strength was not blind, thoughtless rage, but cold, calculated, and unyielding determination. He knew that this conflict, which had seemed utterly hopeless and irresolvable just yesterday, now had a real, tangible chance for a final and just resolution. He felt that fate, after so many years of suffering, was giving him this one, perhaps last chance, and he had no right to let it slip away. The night was deep and utterly dark, without a single glimmer of moonlight or starlight, as if the Montana prairie itself held its breath, awaiting the decisive, fateful hour. A cold wind howled through the ravines, carrying the scents of dust and wild grass. Jake, like a silent shadow that dissolves into the night's darkness, crept toward the massive, imposing building of the county sheriff. His old but sturdy boots, which had served him faithfully for many years, made almost no sound on the creaking, weathered porch planks. In his sinewy, calloused hands was not a formidable revolver, loaded for a deadly duel, but only a small yet incredibly strong crowbar, a tool intended for careful and silent safe-cracking, not for taking anyone's life. He understood perfectly well that direct violence, hot and thoughtless revenge, would lead him directly to a swift and shameful death on the gallows, while Aaron Stone, that cunning and ruthless sheriff, would thus escape his deserved punishment, continuing his dark dealings. Jake needed no blood, no personal score settled. He needed irrefutable, undeniable evidence, that very black book Sam had spoken of, capable of exposing the sheriff's entire rotten system. He, like a skilled phantom, silently slipped into the sheriff's darkened office, through a side window left unsecured by Stone's criminal carelessness. Inside the building, there was an absolute, oppressive silence, so deafening that Jake could hear the pounding of his own heart, echoing loudly in his ears, and his own ragged breathing. He quickly located the massive safe, cleverly hidden behind a large, unremarkable painting depicting a mountain landscape hanging on the wall, and working with astonishing skill, stealth, and precision for his age, managed to crack it open. Inside, beneath a thick layer of years of dust that covered everything around, lay it, that very promised book by Sam, old but perfectly preserved, a black leather book. It was not merely a personal diary, but a meticulously documented chronicle of all Stone's dark schemes, forged loans, fake signatures on documents, a long list of his victims' names, and detailed records of conspiracies with other, no less corrupt, officials and landowners. This was a triumph, quiet, almost invisible, not accompanied by loud cheers, yet absolutely devastating. Jake felt the burden that had weighed on his shoulders for long months finally lift. With this invaluable book, a complete collection of evidence in his hands, Jake did not waste precious time searching for federal agents or appealing to local authorities who might have been bribed by Stone or his accomplices. He went directly to the most respected man in the county, County Judge Hopkins, a man known throughout the West for his impeccable reputation and absolute unyielding incorruptibility. Hopkins, being an experienced jurist, carefully, page by page, examined every entry in the book and was genuinely shocked by the scale, cynicism, and cruelty of the sheriff's crimes. He saw before him not just mistakes, but systemic evil. The very next day, as the sun barely rose above the horizon, painting the sky in soft pink tones, Sheriff Aaron Stone was arrested right in his office. His self-satisfied smirk instantly vanished from his face, replaced by an expression of pure, unadulterated horror and disbelief. News of the arrest spread through the county faster than the strongest wildfire engulfing the dry prairie. All the deceived farmers and widows whose lands and property had been unjustly seized by Stone had their rightful holdings returned, restoring the lost justice. Blackwood Ranch sprang back to life, as if awakening from a long, heavy slumber. The wooden walls of the old structures were repaired, creaking doors replaced, the corrals were once again filled with healthy, well-fed cattle, and above the hearth in the house, it seemed, Emma's kind spirit once again lingered, bringing peace and solace. Jake, though gayer from those months, with wrinkles etched by time and the bitterness of loss, but with a renewed bright glint in his eyes, stood on his restored land, breathing deeply the clean, fresh air of freedom and hope. He was no longer alone. People from all directions whom he had saved from Stone came to him, offering their selfless help in restoring his ranch. Old farmer Thomas O'Connor, whose dairy farm had been fully recovered, helped Jake with new dairy cattle, and Mrs. Evelyn Stokes, having regained her valuable gold mine, donated a significant portion of her profits for new structures and to purchase quality seeds for Jake. Jake didn't just reclaim his property and his home. He became a living symbol of inspiration for all who believed in true justice and the unyielding strength of the human spirit. His story, the story of an old cowboy who refused to surrender in the face of the most egregious lawlessness, became a true legend of the Wild West, passed down by word of mouth. It served as a reminder that even when the system seems invincible, when evil triumphs and it feels as though hope is lost, one person, guided by righteous anger and unshakable hope, can change everything, reclaim what was stolen, and restore the truth. He not only fully restored his shattered life, but also brought back faith and honesty to this harsh, yet beautiful land. The ending was not just a happy conclusion, but deeply cathartic, bringing true liberation and a profound sense of well-deserved satisfaction.